This video is going to talk about cartels. We're going to explain what it is that we mean by a cartel and what is used by what we mean by the term collusion. Cartels generally are something we discuss in once we're talking about a market that is oligopolistic. And so an oligopolistic industry would be one where there's a small number of firms, but more than one. And then we usually also add in that there's barriers to entry. We'll see that that's important here as well. Now we can have models that examine how it is that firms in an oligopolistic model industry would behave, and we'll look at that with the Cournot duopoly model. I'll have a separate video where we talk about that in itself. But once you have a small number of firms, the possibility exists for the small number of firms to come together and behave as if they were a monopolist. So it's important to note, the first thing I have listed here, we want to make sure these are separately owned firms. So one thing they could do, if you've got, like, say, 3 firms in an industry, you could try to merge and all become one firm. If you did, then you'd have a monopoly. So this is a case that we use the term cartel because we're specifically referring to the case where we've got more than one firm. Those firms have to be independently owned and independently operated. They're wanting to maximize profit. And it's important to keep in mind here, they want to usually maximize their own profit. When we say the firm wants to maximize profit, they want to maximize their profit, not somebody else's profit. But if they come together and act as a monopolist, what they could do is produce the monopoly quantity. We know that in chapter 10, we're looking at monopoly. We show that a monopolist, by reducing the quantity relative to that amount that would be produced in perfect competition, the contrived scarcity, reducing the quantity, can let the price rise above average cost to a point where you can make some profits, make economic profits. So what we see is that the firms would want to come together and act as if they were monopolists. That's generally going to mean reducing the quantity that they produce. And we'll look at in the video on the Cournot duopoly, we'll look a little bit at how that would actually happen. But they want to act as if they're a monopolist. That generally would mean reducing their quantity, and that would generally then mean that they would need to come up with a quota amount to produce. One aside is that it's a lot easier, and usually in our models we'll assume that we have identical firms. One of the major issues with cartels is, or any kind of cooperation in this case, we can see is that when there's asymmetries, or when all the firms are not the same, if they have different cost curves. One thing is that, first off, to mimic the monopoly, you have to actually take into account the exact shape of every firm's marginal cost curve. And so it makes the determination of the monopoly, the quantities that each firm would have to make to truly mimic a monopoly a lot harder than say, oh, we have 3 firms, we want to produce 3,000 units in total, so let's divide by 3, that's 1,000 each, we'll have a quota of 1,000 for each of the 3 firms. When you actually have to take into account some differences among the firms, that makes it very difficult. It makes it very difficult because each firm is likely going to try to say that they have conditions that mean that they should get a larger share of the quota. Once you start bargaining over the shares of who gets to produce how much of the 3,000 units a month that you're going to produce, well, that opens up a whole new can of worms, and it can be very hard. But that's what we want to do. But the cartels also run into a problem. We'll be able to show this with some numbers when we're going over the Cournot duopoly. But the problem is that when they are successfully reducing their quantity, then that's what we'll call collusion. The collusion is the act of the small number of firms coming together and successfully acting as if they were a monopolist. They're colluding and they're reducing the quantity. That allows the firms as a group to maximize their profits, but no one firm is maximizing their profit there. There's always a danger in the cartel situation that one firm could try to expand their output and sell some at the expense of the other firms. This is what we call cheating on the cartel. So a firm trying to expand their output and steal away some of the other firm's customers, or maybe attract some additional customers by offering maybe a slightly lower price. And that can be hard to detect. So when we think about what's going to allow a cartel to sustain itself over time, because what we can see is that we can see that there is an incentive for firms to come together and collude as if they were a monopolist, to form a cartel. They will increase their profits as a whole, as a group, if they do so. They will get the largest profit possible. But then there's also an incentive for this to break down, because then because no one firm's maximizing their profits. There is this dual incentive. They all want to come together and reduce their output to produce the monopoly quantity and get the monopoly profits, but they would all like a bigger share of that profit. And they can do that by cheating on the agreement, so we have this tension. What conditions would lead for the firms in the cartel to be more successful in colluding, which may not be a good thing for the rest of us, for the economy as a whole, because we saw that there were efficiency problems with monopoly that reduced quantity, that contrived scarcity, led to a deadweight loss. And you would have the same thing happen here. But from the firm's perspective, the members of the cartel, what are the conditions that could lead to a more sustainable cartel, make it less likely that it's going to break down due to these forces of cheating? Well, the first thing we can say is that the cartel is going to need an ability to identify and somehow punish the cartel members, the ones that happen to be cheating. In a two-firm case, this is relatively simple, because the two-firm case is sort of like almost as if you are living with one roommate, and you happen to see some dishes that are out dirty in the kitchen that haven't been cleaned up. If you have only one roommate, you know who must have done it, and you weren't the one who left the dirty dishes out there. You can know for sure who left the dirty dishes out there. So when you're talking about a cartel between two firms, or the case of the special case of oligopoly we call duopoly, that is relatively easy, because you know who's cheating. If you're not cheating and you know somebody's cheating, you know if you're A, you know it must be B. Once you have three or more firms, well, if you're firm A and you know somebody's cheating and it's not you, you don't know if it's B or C. And that makes it harder. So when we say you need to be able to identify who's cheating, not just that cheating happened, you need to try to identify who's cheating. Because we get a little taste of this when you look at a prisoner's dilemma version of the cartel. But it would be nice if there was some way you could punish the cheating firm, and only the cheating firm, to somehow offset their extra profits that they got. So if there's some way to punish cheaters, that would be great. If there isn't, if you can't tell who's cheating, you can't easily punish that firm, the one thing that the other members of the cartel can do is stop restraining their output. In other words, go back essentially almost to like the competitive output and compete vigorously against each other, because that's going to cost the cheating firm their extra profits. But that costs everybody their profits, so that's an expensive way to try to punish the cheaters. So if you'd really sort of need some way to identify and punish the cheaters. And the other thing is, and we include this as the part of the assumption of one of the assumptions of the model of oligopoly, is you do need to have barriers to entry. If you take all of the existing firms in the market and you reduce your quantity, but there are no barriers to entry, okay, as you reduce your quantity, the price starts to rise, you start to make economic profits. If there are no barriers to entry, other firms are going to start to enter. And you're either going to have to take them into your cartel, in which case you're going to divide up those profits even more, or they're going to compete against you and steal your customers away, because you're letting the price rise. They come in and undercut your price, and you end up losing those profits. And another thing we can sort of say is that it helps if all of the firms value the long run, because what you can probably do is cheat in the short run and boost your profits. Eventually the others are going to catch on, even if there's the problem of, there are more than two firms in the cartel, eventually the other firms are going to stop reducing their quantity. So eventually profits will be lower. When they go back to competing against you and stop abiding by the cartel agreement, even your profits as the cheating firm would be lower. So what you have is a situation, the cheater profits in the short term at the expense of the other cartel members, but then their profits are going to be lower because you go back to competition, you're no longer getting a share of the monopoly profit. So the flip side of that is that if you value those long run profits that you can make being part of a cartel that's getting a share of the monopoly profit, and you value that more than you value the idea of, in the near term, in the next year or so, you might be able to cheat on this agreement and boost your profits at the expense of the others. That's also going to make it easier to sustain the cartel if the cartel members all value the long run. And one thing to point out is that one of the things that helped the OPEC cartel break down in the 1980s was that in 1980 Iraq invaded Iran after the Iranian Revolution. Well, when we were fighting a war, Saddam Hussein had a big need for extra money to buy munitions and fight this war. And so that made Iraq value the short term and value cheating on the OPEC cartel quantities. And that was one of the things that helped undermine the OPEC cartel in the 1980s. And the last thing we'll mention here is that antitrust laws are designed, especially the Clayton Act, are designed to make collusive acts illegal. So what we'll just mention here is that if you're going to have a sustainable cartel, you have to make sure you're not running afoul of antitrust laws. Most nations, especially advanced nations, industrial nations, have antitrust laws to try to criminalize the types of collusive acts that the cartel members would have to be engaging in. One of the reasons why OPEC was successful is that was a cartel of different national oil companies, and there's no international government with antitrust laws that were able to punish them. So we'll just add, I didn't write this up here, but I'll mention that. And the last thing to have a sustainable cartel is you have to make sure you're not going to run afoul of the authorities and violate antitrust laws and get prosecuted for that reason. So that's a little bit about cartels and what we mean by collusion.